Welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt Thiessen.
With me today is life coach and LOA teacher Joel Elston.
This is your daily dose of happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today. Joel, I think it's safe to say that most people know who Sigmund Freud is.
Yes.
Or was. I think that's probably pretty safe. Probably most people have at least heard of Carl Jung. They have some idea of who he is. I'm willing to bet that the vast majority have no idea who Alfred Adler is.
I would concur with that. It is, in my mind, he is one of the top of all time, psychologists of all times.
And a contemporary of Freud, which, again, something most people wouldn't even know.
Right. And so while the topic of the show is Freud versus Adler, or Adler versus Freud. And so there was a point in time where Sigmund Freud, who is probably, I would have to assume to most people, the most well-known psychological person in history. I mean, his modern psychology that we use today is basically based on his theories.
Mm-hmm.
The mindset that your past is the part we have to work on. Everything that took place, it's a rehearsal over and over of what has happened. And then you have a guy named Dr. Adler that comes along, and he saw the world entirely different. He saw it as basically more of a stoic concept of, yeah, bad things happen. We're not trying to say they don't, but let's move forward. So Adler was more about let the future pull you forward, and Freud more of let the past pull you back. And we can't move forward from the past until we reconcile it and have worked on it, and we talk about it a lot. And Adler was like, let's talk about it and then move on. And it's a really
and my take on this, I mean, what you described, it actually laid it out perfectly for me. My take is that one is really the basis for therapy, the other is the basis for coaching.
Yes. And that's so obviously it won't be hard for our audience to realize I'm Team Adler here. Yeah, I use his concepts often in the formation of my modalities and what I do. Again, cognitive behavioral therapy is sort of under his umbrella, where it's about where we are. Let's look at the life. He's about improving the entire condition, moving forward, right mindset. Let's pick ourselves up. Let's move on.
Right.
And you and I've had discussions for a long time about how psychology, who tended to and continues to sort of lean toward the Freud model of the trauma. Let's keep talking about that trauma, and the trauma never goes away. And we're going to talk about it some more. And you get stuck in that victim mindset, that helpless mindset, where Adler was more of a growth mindset person about, yeah, we got it, move on. And this is real controversial. In fact, there's a lot of people that get really angry when these discussions even happen.
Well, it also happened between them because they were originally friends and colleagues, and then they actually had some acrimony going on between them.
Absolutely, because it was such a if you go back to, for those of us old enough, the Sony Betamax versus the VHS format in video recorder, actually the Sony was a better option, more compact, higher quality, but everybody else went with the VHS, and so Sony just sort of fell by the wayside. So Adler is Sony basically here in this discussion. Now, he influences a lot of people, but so there's traditional psychology, and then there's a category of psychology called transpersonal psychology. That is, it is, again, frowned upon by traditional, the psychology. Like if you go to get a degree, you're going to get a traditional psychology degree, and to be licensed, you have to be trained in that. If you want to be a transpersonal psychologist, that's not licensable. You can't have a license for that. One of the models I like in coaching is the reason I like to coach. First of all, it gives me more latitude, but it also my belief system would not technically fall under the guidelines of what traditional psychology does. Right. So the coaching model for me is far better when you use it about let's fix our life. It's really easy. We all have traumas. We all been through stuff, and people people that know me know I don't ignore trauma. I don't act like it didn't happen. But I'm always looking for a point of moving forward. Let's move forward. Let's create new things, not being stuck in the cycle of that. And Adler was a big proponent of the moving forward process. And uh, it really, for most people, in my mind, since that is my model, I think most people, when they try both, they're like, wow, there's a way to move forward while still working on trauma if you need to work on trauma. I have people that I'm coaching that are in trauma therapy with a traditional therapist. It works real well. I'm still about moving forward.
That's an important point right there, because while there is a lot of controversy about the Freudian approach versus the Adler approach, it's not like they're in opposition to each other.
No, no, that's the thing. Everybody wants black and white, always, an answer, one's right, one's wrong. I think that they do coexist often in the right thing. Traumatic events affect how you think, they affect how you behave. So identifying them, processing them, it is important, but it never was intended, in my perspective, to be the point of your life. The trauma should not be the definition of your life. It is something that happened, and I don't want you to be ashamed of it. I want you to be able to deal with it, but I don't want my clients to go around saying that my depression and anxiety is the definition of me.
Because that can have some serious repercussions if you do that.
Yes. And then this is where the law of attraction comes into play. So when you're constantly naming your trauma and acknowledging it over and over, and you're stuck in the trauma cycle, the trauma loop, then again, the law of attraction responding to how you feel. You're going to get more of that. You're going to get more of the traumatic feeling, the I'm being stuck, I'm helpless. The learned helplessness that comes with that is very sad. One of my first clients in private practice, I've mentioned this person before, a doctor referred to me, and he was a psychiatrist. And why he referred to it, she came from another psychiatrist that had passed away. And the psychiatrist said, well, what can I do for you? She said, well, I've been in therapy for the last 15 years and trying to figure out if my father molested me or not. And so this psychiatrist said, why don't you go talk to Joel? Because I don't want to start another 15-year trend. And, let's see where that goes. And if he refers you back to me, we'll do that. But I want to hear his opinion on this. So in my first session, I said, I don't want to sound crass or uncaring. Why don't we just pick a side and go? Because your father's passed away, and the talking about it every week for 15 years is not got you any closer to a resolution. And so knowing or not knowing, it's almost irrelevant at this point. So how can we fix your life now? What's going on right now in your life? Let's get to the action steps of fixing your life right now. Acknowledge that there's a possibility that something happened, but that was 30 years before this. It was there's no way to ever find out an answer to that. And I don't want you stuck in this any further.
And let's address why that particular approach is the one that you want to take, and that particular psychiatrist was hoping that you would take with this particular client. Why is it important to make that shift after all this therapy they've been doing?
Well, when you get in therapy that will have no solution, no answer, it actually becomes detrimental. Imagine talking about the same problem with no answer for 15 years. You become the definition of that. She felt she was debilitated because she couldn't ever figure out the answer to that question. And she said, well, I have nightmares, but I don't know if I remember that right. And she had a lot of reasons why she couldn't remember. And her mom was insistent that it didn't happen, but she said, my mom's an enabler. I wouldn't know. But there was nobody that had any information that can verify factually one way or another. So the being stuck in a problem is when there is going to be no solution, picking a side. And I didn't mean it to come across as I don't think it matters. We're not going to have an answer. So we're going to just assume either that it did or didn't. But where are we at in your life right now? What's going on? She's dealing with depression and anxiety. Where can we start with those things? Does she need medication? Does she need to get focused on doing something differently. She had, 2 kids that were adults at that point. They were doing really well. She had been very productive at work. So I started focusing on what was going right in her life. And eventually we got to a point where, and I said, I don't want to see you for 15 years. I really don't. I want to see you till we can get this straight. And then you be able to function not knowing that answer. But when you've been sold on the concept that you have to have the answer before you can ever do anything about it, that's not good therapy to me.
It's not that it can never be good therapy, though.
What? I don't understand.
Well, I mean, looking to try to give voice to the answer, that can certainly, under certain circumstances, be helpful, can't it?
Oh, absolutely. But at some point, would you agree that 15 years might be a little long to try to do
I would
that?
think that seems a little bit excessive. Yeah.
Yeah, and especially when it keeps you stuck, and that's
Mhm.
that sort of thing. And I'm okay with, if you still need to talk about it with a therapist, that's fine. But let's not wait on that answer before we can take actionable steps to improve the quality of your life.
And so the obvious question that follows along with that is, if you have been going through this kind of a therapeutic cycle, and if you do start taking action-oriented steps, does it work?
It does. It does, in my opinion. I've seen it happen many times. And also, not just totally dismissing the original stuff. It's hard to go from focusing on one topic for 15 years and then not address it at all. But there is going to be a method of stepping away from that, which, what other parts of your life are going, her job was going well, her kids are doing great. She was drinking way too much. So why don't we start with that? Without information of whether she was molested or not, let's start with the information of, hey, you're drinking too much. How can we stop that? What can we reduce that? Can we focus on that without the answer? There's things we could do without that original answer.
So why is it that, I mean, we framed this as Adler versus Freud, and as you pointed out, this is a fairly controversial topic even today.
Yes.
Within the psychological field, the field as a whole. Why is it still so controversial? Where is the angst that comes into it?
Well, there's a lot of people that think, first of all, our general way of thinking, the law of attraction or the Adler transpersonal psychology about fixing it. A lot of people will think you're ignoring, you're victim shaming, you're blaming the victim, which is never the case in my opinion, for me. But there's a lot of people that get stuck on, they own their trauma, they define themselves by their trauma or their diagnosis. That's a trend that I've seen more and more over the years. In fact, I see people on Instagram. I told you I got off Facebook, but I'm on Instagram, and I'll see people, usually younger people, that they're in their little brief description of who they are, they're listing their psychological diagnosis. That's their definition of them. They, I'm borderline personality. I'm this. I'm that. And is that the definition that you're putting out to the world? Is that how you see yourself as that person, as borderline? Borderline is a description of behaviors that is a very complicated psychological process. And I don't think Instagram listing that is any way beneficial, except reinforcing to you that's what you got.
It's a valid point. It reminds me of a story that you've shared a number of times. In fact, you shared it in the book that we put together a few years back about a young boy who we called Marcus, not his real name, who has since grown up and I believe is pursuing a career in psychology. I think
he's doing great. Yes.
Yeah. But it reminds me about how he essentially, in his first conversation with you, did exactly what you just described. He basically, when you asked him to tell you about himself, he told you about all his diagnoses.
Yes.
Because they were how he defined himself.
Yeah. And he was baffled when I kept asking, well, tell me about yourself. I don't understand, I'm oppositionally defiant. I'm depressed. I have an anxiety disorder. I have conduct disorder. And I'm like, okay, that's not what I had. But he just was, he was sitting in front of what he perceived as a therapist. So that's all they wanted to talk about. And where I wanted to tell me, do you like to play video games? What do you do for fun? What, just give me something that you enjoy. And it was so foreign to him. In fact, he was one of the ones, if you remember, he was the one that, after him explaining to me that his mother died while he was in foster care.
Right.
And so I said, oh my God. And so I gave that a minute, and he goes, do you want to know how that makes me feel? And I go, well, I imagine it makes you feel like shit. I mean, your mother died. It's horrible. What stupid question that? He goes, every therapist I've ever talked to asked me that question after I told him my mother died. I go, wow. And he goes, I just thought that's the weirdest question. Like, was I wrong? Because, and I go, I can't speak for the other people. I guess that's how they were trained. How does it make you feel? Your mom died. You're in foster care. You're depressed and you're anxious and you're miserable, would be my guess.
If I were to try to imagine why it is that a therapist would ask that question in the way that they ask it, I'm willing to bet that it's because therapists are trained not to tell clients what's going on with them, but rather to get the clients to bring it out themselves. So that's probably why they're asking the question.
That is the correct way to ask the question for what you're saying. However, when there's something so glaring, well, tell me, how did your mom dying and you being in foster care make you feel? I can just move on. I'm not going to. I didn't say, oh, you felt terrible. I just assumed you felt terrible. And then when he asked, he was baffled that I didn't ask him the question. That's how many therapists he had seen. And I won't even do that to you. Of course. I mean, that's absurd. If you weren't depressed and anxious, I would be far more concerned than if you were, because what happened would be the cause of anxiety and depression.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not being depressed, we were going to need to look at some sociopathy here or something.
That's right.
Yeah. So and again, so when you get into the the people, like I know some trauma people, they're good people, and I'm not minimalizing the work they do, but it is like they just squeeze that, they hold on to it like a secure blanket, and the moment you suggest any step forward, oh no, the trauma must be dealt with before they can move forward. I'm going, I think there could be a simultaneous approach here.
So on the question of Adler versus Freud, this is making me wonder, is it really a question of a controversy between those who adopt the Adlerian viewpoint versus the Freudian viewpoint? Or is it more that the way many people are trained under Freudian type teaching limits them from even considering approaching an Adler type approach?
Exactly. So it's since the standard has been adopted that the Freud-based stuff is where all the approved literature and training comes from. When you go to school, everything that they're teaching you, whether it's the School of Social Work or you're going through another, just being a licensed professional counselor, they're very specific curriculum that was all based in they're based on that. It's similar to another controversial thing that since we're talking about controversial stuff, so hopefully I'm not pissing anybody off because you're not concerned about that. The idea that one of the things that I have a judgment of the education system is 80 to 90% of the people in education nowadays are female. And no disrespect, I'm so grateful that for all our teachers, but the way they learn is different than the way males learn. So when you're developing a curriculum that's based on that, a lot of times I feel like the way most males learn is not taken into account, not on purpose, but this is the way it works for the female brain. And so I've always encouraged more, like, boys in general, ADHD people in general, hands-on, very active, very not sitting in a class trying to memorize timetables and stuff like that. The brain, the boy's brain and ADHD brains work differently than the traditional models.
So we keep mentioning the ADHD. Does that signify that you tend to work more with people with ADHD?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think probably, I mean, certainly all the younger males I work with are ADHD. I have, and also I'm very aware that since I work with so much ADHD, I have a bias towards seeing ADHD.
Right.
So I acknowledge that completely. So I don't immediately jump to that conclusion. But I try really hard to rule out and make sure I'm just not looking for it. And also, a 6-year-old boy is not intended to sit at a desk and read. He's supposed to pick up, run around, touch something, smell it, fart on it, whatever boys do. That's what they do, and that's how they learn. They learn that way. So that's not ADHD. That's just the way that brain learns. Very neuroplastic, and it responds to touching and understanding. And the moment like I have a pocket knife here, pick up a pocket knife. Once they understand how that works, great, fantastic. Put the pocket knife down, get on to the next thing, and that's how they learn.
And I would actually advocate the idea that it's not just boys, it's also young girls do the same thing. I mean, you really need to get up and do things and play with things and experience things, trying to learn everything abstractly. I mean, it is possible for some people to do that. I certainly was able to do that, but not most people. And even for those of us who can do that, it's still not the best way for us to learn. It just means that we can do it. Right. But just because we can do it doesn't mean it's the best way.
Absolutely. When my oldest son was probably 11, he saw a video of a guy he was running over a tube of toothpaste with his car and watching it explode. So he said, "Is that what really happens to a tube of toothpaste when you run over it?" And I go grab a tube of toothpaste. So that led to us running over toothpaste, an orange, but like 50 things we ran over just to see what happened. And it was very fun. We laughed a lot, but it was a science experiment hidden in a fun event. It was exciting. Yeah. So I would ask him after the first 3 or 4 things, like, what do you think this is going to do? Mm. And so he would look at the object, touch it. And so one of the things was a ping pong ball. Okay. And so we put it up under the tire so it wouldn't roll away. And then when I rolled back of it, I didn't know what it was going to do. It made a pretty loud pop because it does. Yeah. And I was like, oh, that was pretty cool. So I didn't predict that would happen. I just thought it was going to make a crunching sound, but it made a pop sound. Right. And you had that, and then you had a banana did what you think a banana would do. Mm-hmm. And then there were some things we'd run over that didn't break at all. That was pretty impressive. In fact, it was funny because this is sort of the original Nokia cell phone. Yeah. Whatever that was made of was indestructible. Really? Oh my gosh. The battery life was like 18 years on one charge, it seemed like. You could drop it and nothing would it's classically tough. The little square brick, the little teeny one. And so I had an old cell phone. It would turn on, but it had no service. I had and he goes, "What's going to happen to that?" And I go, "Oh, well, it'll break." But we ran over it, took it out, and it turned on. That was very baffling. It was the toughest phone ever made, by the way. My $1,000 iPhone would just immediately shatter if I were to do that. But but it was, my point is we that's how they learn. That's how he learned. And so that experiment got him thinking. So I don't want to digress into education, but it's all part of that same thing. Education has a bias toward a certain way of doing it. And there's nobody trying to do anything wrong here. It's just understanding that there's always more than one way. Evolution, for example. Right now, if you don't believe in evolution completely, you're considered, oh my God, that's wacky. We've all accepted evolution. It's accepted. Mm-hmm. So when I say, well, okay, I want to believe you, and I know evolution exists because we see things evolve and adapt, but is evolution the only answer when it comes to humans? Because we do have a space, we have a gap that they don't want to talk about. Right. Yeah. So now I'm not saying it's not evolution, but it's once you have a concept that is just deemed absolutely necessary, you're not allowed to have any differing. That's dangerous to me. And that, I think, is a good way of describing the root of the controversy between Freud and Adler. Yes. You're not allowed to. Yes.
And
And
when I put those words with a controversy like this, the first thought that goes to my mind is you're not allowed to, according to whom?
according to them,
Yeah,
exactly.
right.
You know,
In other words, well, why should we listen to them? Well, they're the authorities. Well, why aren't the Adler people authorities? Well, yeah, but they aren't as good.
well,
I mean,
it's
the
just
thing,
there.
the structure just kind of makes no sense to me. Is why I'm asking about this.
And another controversial thing, since we're getting controversial, by the way, this is in no way a suggestion that somebody should self-medicate or stop medication on any level. You listen to your doctor. I got to say that disclaimer. But the idea that Prozac comes along and it's all of a sudden serotonin deficits are going to fix depression, they do, and there's evidence that they do in a certain population and to a degree. However, everybody, I mean, anybody that reports being depressed gets these medications. Now, is every form of depression a lack of serotonin, or could it be my mom died, my son died? It could be those things. That doesn't cause a lack of serotonin. It's
Mhm.
just there's an assumption, and while that, so what happened, the psychology behind that, or the business model behind that, instead of a psychiatrist, my mentor, Dr. Sherman Master, he was the best psychiatrist I've ever personally met, and he was Team Adler as well. He would spend an hour with every patient every session,
Mhm.
and then he would prescribe meds, but he would prescribe meds based on what's going on and understand. And that was right now finding a psychiatrist that will sit with you an hour and then prescribe med. The average psychiatrist sees a patient for 7.5 minutes, gives them a prescription, and says, check back with me in a month and we'll see how it's working.
Yeah, which is kind of mind-boggling. I mean, you're paying for an hour and you get 7 minutes, and you're paying at a premium rate. Like,
Yes. You're
whoa,
paying a
okay.
lot of money for that, that thing. Now, I'm not trying to bash every doctor, but that model took off mainly because, first of all, what an incredible way to make money when you can,
Mm.
take an hour and charge 5 or 6 or 7 people for an hour and in 1 hour. I mean, that's 7 times your money right there.
Yeah. Yeah, you
And
pay off a lot of student loans that way.
yeah, and again, I'm not saying people don't need medication, but to assume automatically that, without asking the question, like the young man we were talking about, Marcus, he was on multiple different medications, and when we confronted the psychiatrist about his medications, which is later in the story, uh, and he said he asked the psychiatrist, so I'm on Prozac, and what does that have to do with my mother being dead and me being in foster care? I don't understand how Prozac's helping that. And the psychiatrist literally said, your mom died? But, oh, really? The fact that that's something that's relevant and you didn't even know that?
It is mind-boggling. How would he
Yeah.
not know? Yeah, well,
So
I mean, if he's only getting 7 minutes per session, that would explain how he wouldn't know.
yeah. Well, and what they do, and I won't even get a rant about this foster care kids not getting good care, but
Mm.
what they do is they talk to the foster mom or parent or the group home manager and say, yeah, he's been an ass, he screams, he yells, so blah blah. Well, they don't even really talk to the client. They listen to the caretaker who's like, I just want the dude to shut up. Well, the kid can't shut up because he's been ripped from his family, put into a foster care home. Nobody's actually talking to him about the stuff that mattered. And when he
Mm.
acts out, you give him more medication. When he's crying, you say he's depressed. He should be crying. He should be processing.
I mean, it's no wonder he gets optionally defined as one of his
Yeah,
diagnoses.
yeah. This is one of the greatest kids I've ever met. He's a grown man now and doing fantastic. But the idea that he was obviously, it was laughable to me.
Mm.
I've worked with some oppositionally fine kids, but this one was not one.
He was not one. Yeah, it's a cautionary tale. Is the Adler versus Freud controversy? Is it just over action versus repeat playing the same tape over and again until you find out what the actual cause of it was? Is that the entire root of it?
That's the main crux of it, but there's some subtleties in it as well. The philosophy of Adler had a spirituality component in there as well, that a lot of people, it wasn't big, but it was also whatever is fixing your life in general, not just moving forward, but eating well and looking at the whole condition more than just, okay, here's your trauma and or this, all of this is built on that, and all your neuroses and all the other stuff that are taking place are based on that. We're just going to talk about that until it gets better. That there was never a solution to the trauma discussion in my mind that Freud offered. But Adler was more of a comprehensive, let's fix your life. Let's, when I was in my gambling addiction and things were terrible and I lost everything, I was homeless, and eventually got into a treatment program and had to build my life back after getting out of jail. I was still depressed because I was barely making enough money to survive. Had crappy jobs. I just couldn't seem to find a path forward that made sense. How am I ever going to have a quality of life? So I was depressed at my future. And that's when I sort of got introduced to the law of attraction along the way, and changed my thinking and opened the future was always going to be there for me. I just had to be able to tune in and see it. I didn't see a pathway to it because I was stuck in that lack mentality.
Yeah. And I can certainly understand that one. We've heard that story many times here, obviously. And it's what you went through and what you did afterward is truly remarkable. It reminds me though, more and more people are aware of some of these ideas that we talk about, that others talk about, the more alternative approaches that basically emphasize, well, let's see what you can do right now to make your life better. Let's see what you can do to change your mindset, this kind of thing. And it's gaining a lot of traction, but it's still in the minority. That is still the minority viewpoint. And I had a sort of a real world example of that drop in my lap the other day. Not something I pay much attention to. It was on social media, and I don't even spend a whole lot of time on social media anymore. But I was flicking through because I was actually trying to contact somebody through Facebook Messenger, and so while I was there, this thing pops up on my screen. It's a post by somebody who doesn't buy into the whole mindset, go within kind of approach. He's kind of pissed off about it, and the post essentially said, "I'm so sick of people advocating that what I went through was a real problem." In other words, the thing that he experienced, or she, I'm not sure was it he or she, the traumatic experience that they experienced was a real trauma. So therefore, stop bugging me about going within. The real thing actually happened. It was there. Deal with it. Don't give me all this go inside bullshit. That was the argument that the person was making.
Yeah, I don't know why you would hold on to that.
My guess is, in order to deal with stuff by going within, you have to be willing to do the going within part. And the going within part, as you and I know, because we've both done that, is hard to do. It's hard to face. So I mean, one of the hardest things that we have to face is we're the common denominator of our own experiences.
Yes.
So, if you're resisting that, I can see where somebody might come to the conclusion that this person did.
Well, I think a lot of times that is reinforced with traditional psychology. It's told, well, I'll hear all the time, well, it's not your fault. And most trauma is not somebody's fault.
No.
But where a lot of people really get angry is when I make the next statement, but it's your job to fix it. And they don't like that. I don't know who they think is going to fix it, but it's.
Well, they think the therapist is going to fix it.
Yeah. And the therapist can give you ways that you still got to do the work. You got to go within. You got to go deal with that. And that process is something that. So one of the things I met this. I was on a show one day with this lady, and it was I think a radio show maybe back in the day, and we were talking about law of attraction and stuff like that. And she was a therapist, and her whole take on everything. She had deep depression and deep anxiety. Those were her words. And she's on multiple medications, and her anxiety and depression is real. And I said, I'm sure it is. And so the host asked me, you went through severe depression and severe anxiety and addiction. How did it work for you? And I said, Well, I said what worked for me was I'm an exercise freak. That's number one. I did a lot of my own work. I practiced meditation. I dealt with the stuff that had happened the best I can. I worked on changing my mindset. And she interrupted me and she goes, that doesn't work for me. And I very politely says, I thought the question was what worked for me. I apologize if I misunderstood the question, but I thought he asked me. Well, she goes, I'm tired of you people saying that exercise. You're put it back on me. I didn't do anything to cause this. I go, I'm not putting it. I'm just telling you what worked for me. And then then she said, she didn't know my story. She said, I doubt you've had any real trauma.
Oh dear. Yeah, and I've encountered that mindset myself.
Yeah.
I do know that mindset, and
Yeah.
I mean, I feel for people who go through it, but there's also a piece of me that says, I wonder when they're going to decide they've had enough,
Yeah.
because that's really what's not happened yet. They haven't decided they've had enough of it yet.
And that was so baffling to me. And I said, well, I've had some traumas, and and I didn't get into all my traumas or anything. I didn't want to. It sounded exploitive to me to say, hey, yeah, my son died. I have a little bit of a trauma there.
Mm.
I didn't, but in fact, the radio host who had read my book goes, let me be really clear. So Mr. Elston's had trauma that most people, and I said, I am not saying my solution is for everyone. I'm telling you what worked for me.
Mm.
I consider my addiction cured, which is not something you're supposed to say in psychology.
Mm.
Everybody says I've been recovery. I no longer have an addictive brain. It's changed. I'm not going to go gamble again. I'm not. That's just not a thing I'm going to go do. Again, traditional stuff doesn't like that. I
Mm.
cured my depression. I cured it. I don't, when I say I cured the severe anxiety, I'll occasionally have stress, which is normal,
Mm.
but that debilitating anxiety stuff doesn't exist with me anymore. And that's, just a lot of my stoic beliefs and I did all the work around that. I did a lot of
Mm.
work for all of this stuff. So
Mhm.
I don't deal with those things anymore. I think my brain is healed from that. And I have no idea why someone would be upset that that worked for me. And you know me well enough. I will say what worked for me.
Mhm.
I am not a solution to everybody. I am not. The people that believe the way I believe and do what I do can find success. I accept that this won't be for everybody, but I couldn't live a victim mindset the rest of my life, believing that there's no solution. And when you believe like somebody believes that, you become helpless. That's learned helplessness. And you offer no solution to yourself. And you basically made this a lifetime curse.
Yeah. And in fact, everyone who experiences that kind of thought process that we've been describing here, someone who would respond the way that woman responded to you on that radio program, if you have that kind of a mindset, I don't recommend reading the book
No.
because it'll probably just add to your depression. But do like a chat GPT request on summarize what the Learn Helplessness book is about, and just see how much of it is a reflection of what you're going through.
Yeah.
Because what you're
Yeah.
going to find is the parallel is almost exact. It's almost perfect.
It is. And one thing I want to be really clear about, I'm not trying to shame anybody in whatever they're doing. And life is very complicated, and it has many, many different avenues to take and look at. I just want to advocate for, there's a group of people that is greatly, I think we've been marginalized. The Team Adler crowd has been marginalized because that was the thing that was sort of ruled out. It was the one that we left beside. And
Mm.
it's not about a personality thing with Adler or Freud. It's simply about a modality that I find much more action oriented, which is a key word for me,
Oh
action.
yeah.
Taking action, moving forward. I want a solution that includes something I can do. If the only solution you give me is I have to sit and wait for a therapist appointment once every week, and so that's not enough action for me. I'm not saying that's part of my action taking, but it can't be the only action forward.
And I think it's also fair to point out what we're describing about the Freudian approach to therapy is very common among therapists, but it's not the only approach. There are
Right.
therapists who practice other modalities, other ways of handling therapeutic situations. And one that comes to my mind is my ex-wife. She was a therapist for 10 years. She essentially burned out because she was working with clients who didn't really want to be there in the first place. They were court appointed. So the court was telling them you had to go get therapy. And so that's how she was seeing them. And as a result, they weren't really motivated to get better. They were just motivated to get past the court sentence. So that ended up driving her away from it. But she told me a story that really touches on what you're talking about. She talked about how very early, it was before she became a professional working with clients, when she was still in her training period. She was in the training period, and I don't even know what they call it, but you have to go through a process where you're working with clients, but you're doing it under supervision,
Yes.
and they're evaluating you and all that.
You're under supervision. Yes.
Yeah. And she was doing that, and she was getting frustrated because the clients that she was working with, they didn't seem to get any better. And she didn't understand why. And it was really affecting her. It was affecting her so severely that she had to talk with her supervisor and say, I don't understand what I'm doing wrong here. I mean, I really want to help these people, and nothing I do seems to make a difference. I just can't seem to cure them. And her supervisor was brilliant. Her supervisor said, that's because you're focusing on the wrong thing. It's not your job to make them better. She says, what? That's what I'm here for. He says, no, that is not your job at all. Your job is to provide them with information so that if they want to do something, this is what they can do in order to get better. It is not your job to make your client better. And once she finally grasped that, it was like, she described it, it was like there was a weight taken off her shoulders.
Sure.
Like all of a sudden, she didn't have to be responsible for that anymore. All she had to do was to help people get the information they needed in order to do the improvements they wanted to make, if they wanted to make improvement.
Yes, I love that. And that her supervisor was brilliant, because you understand that, particularly in those cases where, I have a belief that anybody presenting for treatment, or one of my clients, where if I'll tell the parents all the time, when, if they were going to make a 14-year-old come sit in my office and he adamantly doesn't want to be there, I'll try. And I have had some success breaking through occasionally, but there has to be some minor buy-in. There has to be something, because there's nothing more stubborn than a 14-year-old boy who's determined not to say a word to the dumbass therapist. He's not going to speak. And I have ways I try it, but I'll tell the parents all the time, or if somebody's dealing with addiction, even an older person dealing with addiction, or somebody in their 20s or 30s or 40s, the desire to get better is a prerequisite to any path you're going to take. If you really don't want to get better, don't waste your time. I had a mom the other day call me and said, in a very wealthy family, said, what is the best treatment center in the country? Where can we send our son? And I go, well, I said that there's no way to even determine what that is. But the truth is, your son doesn't want help. So the best treatment center in the entire world will do nothing for him. But if he wants help, the worst treatment center in the world will do wonders for him. It won't matter. And that was that. And that, I believe that statement, because if you want it, anything will work, because you want it bad enough to do it. If it's the idea that, I don't want to do it, I'm on these conditions, it's like, no, it doesn't work that way.
Well, also, is it really enough to just want it, or do you have to also want it and be willing to do something about it?
Want it
because I mean, there are certainly going to be people who will sit in front of a therapist hoping that the therapist somehow waves a magic wand and they're cured.
Well, yeah, but at least the door opening is wanting it. And then you implement then you, like anything else, the stages of change, the pre-contemplative stage of, I don't like how this is working out for me. Maybe I need to do something about it. That's the starting point. But if you're adamantly like, I don't have a problem and I don't want help, and somebody forces you to get help, it doesn't. It's just a really hard bar to get past.
Yeah, well, and my ex can attest to that, because that's what she did for 10 years. And that's why she left, because there was no satisfaction working with people who didn't want to be worked with.
Well, one of the things, I do have several strategies that I've had success with a kid that's sitting there that didn't want to sit there. And one of my favorites, I've shared it with you before. There's a few of them I shared, but so this kid comes in and he sits down, I don't know, 13, 14 years old, just hell bent. He goes, my mom's making me be here, and I'm not going to say anything. I said, okay. So I just sit back in my chair, got my phone, I start
Yes, I know which one this is. I remember this one.
Yeah, and I'm just scrolling through my phone, and he's like, so he's sitting there, and he goes, can I leave? And I go, no, you're here for the hour. And he said, well, is there anything I can do? And I said, well, no, you're here to talk, but you don't want to talk. I said, whatever. So we sat there, and I kept scrolling. He goes, well, why can't I just leave? I go, well, there's nobody here. Your mom's coming back in an hour to get you. And so he's like, okay, what do you want to talk about? And I go, I don't know. What do you want to talk about? He goes, and then so we go back and forth for this type thing. And so I basically just am chatting with him. He goes, you're not really good at what you do, are you? I go, I mean, probably not. And I'm getting, I said, he said, well, why aren't you asking me the right questions? And I said, well, what do you think the right questions are? And he goes, well, why don't you ask me if I'm depressed? And I go, oh, that's a good. Are you depressed? And he goes, probably. I said, okay. I said, what's the other good question? He goes, well, why are my grades bad? I go, oh, that's a good one too. And so he literally gave me everything I needed with telling me the questions of why I'm doing a bad job. And so we ended up having a really good session. And afterwards, his mom texted me this. He said he gets in the car and he said, she said, how was it? He said, it was really weird. I don't think he really knows what he's doing, but it was really good. I do want to go back. And we ended up having a great therapeutic relationship, and he did really well. But it was that initial, I'm not going to make him talk. So I just, sat there, and I knew he was going to eventually start talking. He's not going to sit there for an hour and not say anything. And so being able to find ways to get them to do it. But he literally asked me, his questions were accurate based on what he was going through. So I was able to get a complete understanding, and then we started working on it. It was amazing. And it's just,
I love that story.
Yeah, he laughs about
another
it.
story I love. There's a second one that you tell that I love. You haven't told it in a while, but it's the one about what's your favorite Beatle.
Oh yeah. So the other one that I use when I have a resistant client is, the one the one that was so funny is I have, a list of exhausting questions. It's just, I will ask, it's 150 questions. And so they start off therapeutic. They start off common sense. So do you feel safe in your house? So the kid's like, yeah, just nods. How are your grades? You're grunting, making noise. So I just go through all the questions. They eventually turn to, what do you like to do? What's your favorite sport? Do you watch sports? Do you play video games? What video games do you play? And, I just keep asking the questions, either no response, a head nod, or a grunt I'm getting. So finally, like question 123, I said, what's your favorite Beatle? And he's like, what? Your favorite Beatle? Most people say Japanese, but I don't know. What do you think your favorite Beatle? He said, this is just ridiculous. and that just started our whole conversation. He laughed, and then once I get somebody to laugh, and then but it's that icebreaker. It's that ability to break through that first thing, because when I view it, especially the younger clients, when they walk in the door, they're guarded. The front door is guarded. I mean, they're not letting anybody in, but the side door is unguarded. So I'm going to ask the things to get, I just need to get some conversation started. And the Beatle, I just always, by the time I get to I always worried. He was one of the few that I was worried I was going to run out of questions.
Really? Interesting.
Yeah. If the Beatle didn't break him, I mean, your favorite foreign fruit might have broken him, but we didn't get there.
Yeah. Is he the one who later on answered the question?
Yeah. Oh yeah. He got back in the car, told another one. He told his mom, and so she texted. She said, he asked to make another appointment, and I don't know what this means, but he says Japanese. I said, I know what it means. Tell him thank you.
That is great. I love that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it's about breaking through. It's about seeing things a little differently. But that sort of gets back to the original concept of, yeah, I believe, and we have a toolkit, of multiple toolkit. Not
Mhm.
everything works for everybody.
Mm.
There's nothing wrong with some of Freud's approaches. I get upset when we get stuck on only one answer. When we get to say
Mm.
this is the only way to do it because this is what the group decided was best, and it's not taking into account the fringe groups, the other people that it could have gone. Adler had been the main thing, and we would have had a whole different approach to it. The whole trauma industry might not have even existed to the level it does today.
Well, the thought that comes through my mind is, regardless of whether it's Adler or Freud or anybody else, who's the guy that becomes the father of modern psychoanalysis, the bottom line to me is, when do we take into account individual differences?
Yes.
Because any model that says it can only be one way says essentially everybody is the same, and we know that that's not true.
And that was one of Adler's statements at one point. Like this is the individual we're treating, not the over. This blanket approach doesn't work. Carl Jung tended to lean toward Adler as well. Carl Jung's another. His belief systems were closer to Adler's than Freud's. That's a whole different topic. But he's Carl Jung's great too.
Mhm.
But there's a film series called Gloria. It's on YouTube. People can look it up. And there's 3 therapists. Uh, it would never be allowed today. This is a real person back in the 60s that did a video working with 3 different psychiatrists or psychologists in various different approaches.
Mm.
And it's fascinating to watch her response. One is a very aggressive gestalt theory, like in her face, like just and ironically, later she found that to be the most helpful. But she then further, after she said it was the most helpful, she actually said it wasn't. But she was used to so much abuse in her life, she related to the aggressive approach, and it was weird.
Wow,
So
interesting.
if you ever want to look that up, well, the Gloria series on YouTube is a really good psychological study. It would be malpractice to do that
Oh,
today.
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And you could see why, because you don't want to abuse somebody in order to deal with abuse. I mean, that's just
Yeah, and there's 2 of the other doctors. One was way too nice and actually was sort of flirting with her at one point. It was a weird
mm,
thing to watch.
yeah. Is that an indication of, at that time, the amount of knowledge wasn't like it is today, like the amount of data wasn't as much today, or is it simply that there are such wide differences in therapeutic practices?
I think it's such wide differences, and in the big scheme of things, psychology, even though the origins of Stoicism are the foundation of cognitive behavioral therapy. So the idea that this stuff has been around a long time, but the understanding of psychology and it's still evolving. And it's like anything else. Once a group of people sort of believe something, like if you I won't get into the full description, but therapists who use EMDR, it's a very effective treatment technique. Anybody knows EMDR?
What
But
is the MDR? What I mean, fill in
it,
the blank.
it's it's rapid eye movement desensitization. It's a way to treat trauma by moving the eyes back and forth, by creating a flutter of the eyes, which somehow I don't know how it all unfolds. But it's effective. But is it effective because the therapist that's conducting it believes it's effective and sells it really hard because they really buy into it?
Mm.
Or is it really effective? Dr. Master said that he thought it was effective, but it's when your therapist believes something so strongly and you do it, you buy into it. And that was one of his things. There's also a thing called tapping, EFT, emotional freedom technique,
Right.
which is a little different, but sort of goes on the same theory. There are studies saying they're both equally as effective, or almost the same. Now, the EMDR people don't like that, but the
Well, the EFT
EFT,
probably people don't like it either. So it's fair.
Yeah,
It's fair, you know.
yeah. So when you look at that, so when you look at like the emotional freedom technique, I like that. It's a great way to distract for panic attacks. It calms you down. But is it working because it's working, or is it working because you believe it's working? It doesn't matter. It's working.
This is true. It does also lead into one final subtopic that we can address on the whole Adler versus Freud thing, which is Adler and Freud had two different approaches to how you deal with traumatic situations that are holding you back in some way. And I think we did a pretty good job during the show here to outline what those differences are. But it also raises the question, which is, to what degree do people get better using one model or the other simply because they believe that the model is going to work, or they believe that the therapist is going to get them there?
We get back into one of our favorite topics is placebo, you and I.
Right.
And so the influence of what you believe is working is the biggest influence of what's going to be working. It's just, I go by, and again, as I said, I have a bias toward action, a bias toward something I don't want to be helpless. I want to be able to, if there's any kind of an answer or a string I can pull on, I want to go give my energy toward that. That's where I find healing for me is what can I do when you're being told there's nothing you can do but talk to your therapist once a week for years. That's the only solution. Then you believe that's the only solution. And like you said, there's people that get angry when you suggest this is real. It's real. Of course it's real. Nobody's saying it's not real, but there's not, when you are defined by that, and that's what I get freaked out about is so many people nowadays, there's pop psychology on Instagram and TikTok is, wow, it's out of hand because people are diagnosing things. And, like I saw a lady that had 7 diagnoses. I forget what they were. Technically, they would not be able to all she picked some of those herself because they can't all go together.
Wow.
But that was that's her statement of who she was.
Yeah.
So it's a fascinating topic. I'm fascinated by weird things, but I've done a deep dive on the Adler stuff and the Freud stuff, and they're certainly huge leaders in the field. I think psychology. I would like more information on all sides, more studies on all sides. We have a tendency to pick one side and only study that, for example. But I'm an advocate for psilocybin for therapeutic use for people. That's something that it's still illegal in most areas. That's a very promising thing, and a lot of Adler stuff would work really well, in my opinion, with that type of sort of help with a psychedelic or the mushroom effect in the brain.
Actually, I have a guest on within the past week who also advocated the same kind of thing about not just psilocybin, but psychedelics in general. I thought, wow, it'd been great if this had been on a show with Joel. I would have loved to watch the two of you go at it, but
that'd be great. Yeah, my normal disclaimer is illegal, but there's a lot of studies toward it. It could be. I've experienced it. I found it very helpful therapeutically. It's a future tool. So I would love to. I'm an advocate for moving mental health forward. I don't want to be stuck on any one thing. I just look at and again, I have a unique set of clients that tend to come to me. So I tend to use the formula that works for my clients. So
makes sense.
all those disclaimers out there, but it's more of a topic of discussion. It is a fascinating topic to me when you understand it. It's, remember we did a show on Milton Erickson, the hypnotherapist that cured his own, that cured his own polio.
Right.
That was fascinating. Was able to walk after not being able to walk polio. So I'm obviously a brain nerd. I've studied all these things, so I'm fascinated by the things that get lost along the way. It's pretty amazing that some of these things aren't common knowledge.
Well, I picked stuff up just by doing this show, but I'm certainly not trained in the field of psychology, and yet I just kind of look at the starkness of one piece of it that really boggles my mind, because we mentioned the book Learned Helplessness, which is by Dr. Martin Seligman. And I remember I actually read that book when it came out in the early 90s. I didn't read the whole book. I read about a third of it, and then I got too depressed and I couldn't finish it because it was really horrible reading all the stuff that he was writing about. But Dr. Seligman, a few years later, ends up being one of the founding leaders of positive psychology. And I mean, that just blows my mind. He was at one end completely, and then he swaps over to the other end.
The amazing whatever happened, the amazing shift from learned helplessness to the positive psychology part that he's the founder of.
Yeah.
Is fascinating to me. And so along the way, he obviously experienced things that are like, wait a minute. And he was the perfect messenger for positive psychology because he was the most negative human being on the planet before that.
Which is astonishing, but it makes sense. I mean, from a contrast point of view, it makes sense. You study the contrast and understand what you don't want to make it easier to understand what you do want. I mean, it does make sense. It's just, wow, we don't really run into that very often.
Well, and another piece to that too is which side he's on, he is definitely knowledgeable. And so
that guy is very knowledgeable.
He's one of the smartest people I've ever heard talk. I've read all of his stuff, read a lot. I mean, it's amazing. And it's something that he's the perfect messenger because he's seen both sides.
Which is a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
Well, we love seeing your sides too. I mean, you've shared some amazing sides. Thank you for doing that today. And thanks for suggesting this Adler versus Freud topic, because it's been quite fascinating to say the least.
All right. Great to see you, my friend.
Great to see you too. Thank you to our podcast listeners everywhere. We'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.